Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a panel discussion of members of the Balaton group. When in 2012, governments of the world gathered in Rio de Janeiro to discuss the state and direction of the global environment and development at a Sustainable Development Summit. One of the major results of that discussion, of that discourse, was focused on setting new goals for global development. These became termed the Sustainable Development Goals. They are parts of the global, they will be parts of the global infrastructure that sets the course of development over the next several decades. When we set off on this journey in Rio, there were many skeptical voices that thought that that these instruments, this ambition, this process to set out these new goals were too ambitious. The agenda was too complex. There were too many issues, and there were too many interests that are pulling the global community in different directions. Here we are in 2014, and despite these misgivings, despite these cautions and warnings, just this year, this summer, at the end of this summer, an open working group at the United Nations managed to actually define and agree on a new set of global goals. So we have done something, the global community has done something unique that it hasn't done before for setting us a new course. So I would like to welcome you to give you highlights of discussion that went on over the last couple of days as part of the 2014 meeting of the Balaton group. My name is László Pinter. I'm a professor in the Department of Environmental Sciences and Policy here at CU, and I'm also senior fellow at the International Institute for Sustainable Development in Canada. And most of all, I'm like my panelists here, I'm also a member of the Balaton group. So I would like to briefly introduce the members of the panel and then say a couple of words about today's program. So first, I have Janusz Linsky, who is with the Regional Environmental Center for Central Eastern Europe and the director of their Sustainable Development Academy. But Janusz just returned from New York, where he spent several months as the chief advisor to the co-chair of the Open Working Group on Sustainable Development Goals at the United Nations. So working from inside the UN system and watching and helping and assisting that process in the final critical stages. So Janusz has that insight. Then I have Professor Tariq Banouri. Tariq is with the University of Utah. But before that, he was the director of the Sustainable Development Division at the United Nations, and he has an even longer history working on sustainable development issues at the Stockholm Environment Institute, the Tellus Institute, and many other places that I probably can't even list. Then on my left, I have Professor Vala Ragnarsdottir.
Pretty good.
Pretty good. Vala is from Iceland, and she's a professor at the University of Iceland, working on a wide range of sustainable development issues, from soil science to sustainable development, and trying to bring together the biophysical and the social aspects from the science perspective. And
does my science colleague think I'm mad?
In a certain way, we all are, perhaps. And to the left of Vala is Hunter Lovins. Hunter is coming to us from Boulder, Colorado, or just outside of Boulder, where she runs and operates a farm. And besides that, she's an advocate for green economy, using the power of markets and the power of the private sector to facilitate the sustainability transition. I'm not giving this justice, Hunter.
It's all right.
But I know that you will. And she is like all others on the panel. She's a very, very well-known and widely published author on sustainable development. And to the left of Hunter, we have Jamila Haider. Jamila is with the Stockholm Environment Resilience Center in Sweden. She is, like many in the audience, is in the middle of finishing or doing her PhD on resilience, of course, and Jamila will also tell us about, I think, about her experience as a former Donella Medals Fellow. The Balaton Group is very thinks it's very important that in our ranks we bring in perspectives on the future, also by inviting fellows and members and continuing our activities into the future. So before I turn to members of the panel, very briefly, just a few words about the Balaton Group. The Balaton Group was established by Donella and Dennis Meadows, the authors of Limits to Growth. As many of you would know, Limits to Growth was published in 1972. In many ways was an iconic thought, an iconic and important idea, new idea, in certain ways seen as a controversial idea that was critiqued, that was informing research and policy. And for many years, it was heavily criticized. Now, if you look back from the present, and that's one of the key insights that also came from our meeting. Limits to Growth is an idea that has major relevance. The book and the ideas behind that book, in retrospect, turned out to be influential, in many ways reflecting reality. And so what is important is that the ideas behind this book are brought to bear on our thinking of the future, and the Balaton Group is bringing some of this intellectual legacy to a question that is now in front of policymakers. Goals, of course, are about the future, and they are also about goals for the future on a planet with boundaries and limitations. So we have to be clear on how we operate under those conditions. Underlying the Limits to Growth idea and central to the thinking of the Balaton Group is systems thinking, understanding the complexities of the world, understanding how environment and development is related, interest and experience in building, using, and bringing tools, analytic tools to bear on decision making. So many of the ideas that are behind the Sustainable Development Goals, such as planetary boundaries, for instance, emerged from discussions by members of the Balaton Group, and some of these actually emerged from discussions at Balaton Group meetings. So, and now these are discussed at the United Nations. They will be discussed in capitals, by governments, by non-governmental organizations, and others. So, the fact that the Balaton Group has discussed and is considering Sustainable Development Goals also brings that legacy. For us, it is a big deal that goals, Sustainable Development Goals, are discussed, and we would like to bring our intellectual capital to bear on this agenda. So, without further ado, I would like to turn to members of the panel. What we will do is I'll give a couple of minutes to each member of the panel, give them the floor to reflect on various aspects of the meeting we just had over the last several days. We will, by providing you these debriefs, we will also try to give you a sense of the key insights that emerged from the discussion of the last week. So first, I would like to turn to Janusz Linsky, who, as I mentioned, spent several months as an insider of the SDG process. And to give us an overview of not just what the SDG process was and what its purpose was, but also what did he learn about the mechanism, about the way these goals were defined, and why does he put hope? Because I know he puts hope into the SDG process. What is the hope in having common sustainable development goals at the global level? Anna?
Thank you very much, Laszlo, and very warm greetings to everyone. I'll try to be brief here at the upset, or onset rather, and then we will have chances to discuss points in more detail, I suppose, with yourselves and the panel. So I'll try to flag a few things and you know, just put exclamation marks at a few points in this introduction. But let's start with the last question: why I would think there is hope? Because I would say the process which produced this set of goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, and by the way, the goals were passed by a United Nations decision, a resolution of the United Nations General Assembly on September 10th. So it's now official. This set of goals have been produced in a very special, unprecedented process. The open working group was truly open. 2 years before now, in June 2012, we had the second Rio conference. And many of you have heard about the first one, and many of you would have heard about the Stockholm conference even 20 years before that, and would know how many milestones, gravestones if you want, we have on this way of quest to sustainability. Gravestones because those are markers of decisions we never implemented as an international community. And so there we go in June 2012 in Rio. And among the documents submitted to that conference, there was a report by the United Nations Environment Programme called 21 Issues for the 21st Century. And I really recommend you to read through that. 21 Issues for the 21st Century. Now, among the five most burning issues of those 21 was the closing of the science policy gap. That basically the policy is not evidence-based. That the reality and political ambitions are very much apart in many cases. Now, what the Open Working Group did was to close this gap just for 20 months in the life of the United Nations. And there was a process where it was not just that the co-chairs tricked a procedure in whereby instead of the originally envisaged 30 countries, 193 countries ended up in the chamber. And that was already something for openness. But at the back of the chamber, there were all the NGOs, the other stakeholders, business associations, academia, churches, NGOs of very different ambitions and championing very different cases. And I have to underline science again and again because scientists from all walks of science, so we are talking about social sciences and natural sciences, were invited in a long series of what I could call mini conferences around 31 major themes, major issues, major problems, from women's empowerment to drinking water and from national parks conditions and biodiversity to unemployment and from segregation and racial hatred to childbirth and maternal health and underage, under 5 death rates. So very diverse, all walks of life, all real problems of human life and human conditions on the globe. And for more than 18 months, actually around 18 months, month by month, a week was spent with first listening to the status quo as presented by the best institutes, best and relevant, most relevant institutes of the world. The status quo in the world about biodiversity, the status quo about fishery stocks, the status quo about industrialization, and the trends. What would happen if we could just go on like now, what the trends are now? And the politicians in the room, the delegates of the UN member states, were listening to this evidence given to all of them together. So not me briefing or being briefed by my scientists and you being briefed by your scientists, and then we coming together as politicians and interpreting what each of the scientists have said to us, but sitting together and listening together to the group of scientists who are relevant for that field. And having the chance of saying, no, I don't believe this, prove it, getting into debate, and arriving somewhere. At that point, the political conclusions start. And from that vantage point, the political conclusions start. And gathering the political conclusions from 31 issues, then the co-chairs had the unenviable task to try to focus down and try to sieve out the essence from what has been heard, both in terms of goals, of chief tasks for humanity, and then individual targets under those goals, that is individual tasks, very quantifiable tasks to which one could put deadlines, and one has to put deadlines and quantities. This was the process which was running for more than 20 months and was quite unprecedented. It ended after a very, very long session in a consensus decision by those 193 countries about 17 goals, and under those 17 goals, nearly 170 targets, so on the average, every goal has about 10 targets underneath it. It's a bulky document. And those of you in the environmental policy will understand my metaphor if I'm saying that you see that there is the group had a chance of whether reproducing the Millennium Development Goals, that document like the Millennium Development Goals, which is 8 goals and about 3 targets under each goal, or producing something like what the Agenda 21 has been, with 40 chapters and very detailed agendas under those chapters. Now, we were not quite 40, we were 17, so it's something in between, but it's a very interesting document. So, my hope basically is in the process. My hope is in that this process can continue, because all the job has not been done. And I would finish with a metaphor for you to understand where we are exactly and what is to come. Imagine that somebody is very sick, very, very sick, and a group of doctors come together for a so-called concilium to find out, first of all, what's the problem, and second, to suggest a therapy. And what happened was exactly that. The open working group was given this task. With the help of the scientists, it was established what is the status, what is the situation. And then the politicians, again, in discussion with the NGOs, the stakeholder community, and science, took it upon themselves to to propose a therapy for the world. In an ideal case, this would have to be done urgently as a priority. It is not the task of these doctors to find the money for that operation, for instance. It's not the task of these doctors to build the operating theater or the instruments, the X-ray machines. And it's not them who will ultimately decide who does the operation. So there are 3 other groups in the UN working on exactly these tasks. What are the partnerships? Who is the operating team around the different goals? Where is the money coming from? Is it social security? Is it private money? Whatever. And what are the instruments which can be deployed, technically speaking, for the different tasks? And now the Secretary General has the unenviable task to achieve over the coming months until September 2015 a synthesis of these 4 necessities: what has to be done, the means in financial terms, the means in technical terms, and the means in institutional terms. And we hope that if the process is kept open and interactive, then this will indeed happen for the post-2015 agenda, September 2015. That is a year from now.
Thank you, Jan, for the overview. You know, from if we look at the results of this process from a more historic perspective, I think you have to, you know, excuse an external observer who says, well, okay, you know, we went through this process, so what? You know, global goals have been identified before. One of the most often quoted example was the Millennium Development Goals. Okay, you know, some progress has been made on some of these goals, but it's not even clear that the goals were really the most important in addressing poverty, wherever poverty improvement was made at all, and in many cases there was no progress. Yeah. But it was simply economic growth. So global goals, do they really matter when it comes down to capitals, when it comes down to individual companies? And look at what happened over the last 1 or 2 decades. Just this last year, as we now know, for instance, the emission of the greenhouse gases exceeded almost anything that we've seen before. So whether we look at some of the current trends on whether that's an environment, whether it's related to poverty, we do see some marginal improvements in certain cases, but we're certainly not seeing the type of turnaround that we have to see. So that's one sort of perspective on this, and the other perspective is really about how much faith we can really put in UN processes. I mean, how much can really do the UN do in terms of having an influence on those whose actions and behavior makes a difference. You know, the individual, the super consumer in the rich West, or the desperate slum dweller on the Indian subcontinent. And then when you add to that a perspective on just how efficient and effective, or inefficient and ineffective, our existing governance mechanisms are to deliver, then I think one has to be excused to be questioning just what can these goals achieve. So I would like to turn to Tariq and see if you agree with that, or if you want to give us some hope or some insights.
I don't.
It's not fair. I gave you a difficult job.
A little bit of both. How many people here believe that goals work, that they help achieve something? Can you please raise your hand? I just want to see. Thank you very much. And how many people believe that goals are useless, that they are basically pious hopes and they don't really achieve anything? And I would not mind if the people who raised the hands on the first question also raise the hands on this one. Because I raise my hands on both times.
That's right.
Because yes, there are goals which have helped, and yes, there are goals which thus far have not helped. I mean, climate change being one of them. We have known for the last 20 years that the world is going to hell in a basket because of climate change. We know that we need to cut our emissions down. We have tried to put that idea out there. Governments have come together to agree, and yet nothing has happened. That the world is still getting. On the other hand, we also know that there are goals which, if had they not been articulated, we would not have achieved them. I personally, disagreeing with you slightly, Laszlo, I personally believe that the Millennium Development Goals have been enormously successful. They helped articulate an agenda at a time when it was not on the minds of policymakers. This was a time 14 years ago when we were in the age of neoliberalism, of the Washington Consensus, of globalization, in which, you know, the powers that be felt that, you know, here is an economic progress going on and we should not worry. And at that time came the United Nations and said, we have to worry about the poor. And we have to worry about the poor. No matter what happens to growth, we have to make sure that we cut poverty. And then cut poverty means the head count of poverty, it means hunger and nutrition, it means education, it means health, it means women's rights, it means environmental rights, and we have made progress on most of those goals. And I think my assessment tells me that it would not have happened. There might have been something that would have happened. I want to give one other example, which is a little bit narrow, but I think it's helpful. In 1983, a wonderful, charismatic, and an enormous person who benefited the human race took over as the head of UNICEF. His name was Jim Grant. And at that time, like many UN agencies would come in, their heads would be appointed, they would be doing a lot of things, and they would continue to do them. And Jim Grant came and said, no, we have to achieve something. And he came and said, let's have a goal. And the goal was universal immunization of children. And he said, I don't want to talk about it in general terms, I want to achieve it. And in 7 years' time, it was done. Now, that was actually a head-turning moment for all of us, because all of us suddenly got up and said, somebody actually has to come out and say it. Let me just step back a little bit. When we think in terms of governance, think in terms of three basic conditions. Number one is articulation and commitment. Okay, and I have something more to say about it. Number two, creation of support, both institutions, financial and so forth, creation of conditions that can support. Number three, a kind of efficient capacity, strong capacity systems which can deliver on those commitments. Now remember, first of all, that it is never in the interest of the powerful to express a commitment. It is never in the interest of the powerful to be tied down. The world is what it is. I am powerful, I have my privilege, it will continue. But we create conditions in which they have to articulate a commitment. So, just as you think at national levels, when there is an election, a political leader comes to you as citizens and says, I promise you that I will do this. What they're doing is they're trying to place themselves in your hands and say, I give you my commitment. Come back and hold me accountable. This is the role that the United Nations has been playing systematically. Not as the vehicle of power, but as a way of conditioning power. Think of the United Nations as the instrument of the citizen. It is your instrument, and it is my instrument, and it is her instrument. It is our instrument. It is forcing the powerful groups to articulate a commitment so that we can hold them accountable. Every year when you go to the climate conference, you have thousands of people standing out in the street and waving and saying, bring down your emissions. You committed that you would do it. And the politicians are afraid of going out into the public because they are going to be attacked. That is the role that we are trying to create a goal, to create a vision. Now, the task that Janusz and others have done, it's a very difficult task. If I went around to this room, which has about 25 people, and said, let's agree on something, you will realize how difficult it will be. I mean, we can probably agree on going to a cafeteria for lunch or for dinner, but on actually substantive things, it's very, very difficult. To get 193 countries to agree on something is a very difficult process. Now, those countries have agreed, and having agreed, they have expressed, created on behalf of the powerful of the world, a commitment to you and me as the citizens of this world. They said, we give you our commitment. Now, as far as I can see, the responsibility is not a separate, is not a, shall we say, that it's their responsibility, it's a joint responsibility. That condition has now been created. Now it is for us as citizens to hold them accountable. And I can say 2 or 3 things. I know that when the Millennium Development Goals were agreed upon, if we had kind of left them, I think things would not have been as good as they are now. But civil society, citizens rose up, people did research, people did analysis, people did monitoring, articles were written, data was produced, people stood out and protested. The same thing about climate change. You know, the citizens came out, people are doing analysis, they're coming out in the street and saying, prove to us that you're doing this. The same thing we have to do now. The diplomats can only go so far. They are bound by the craft. They have to get a consensus agreement. Beyond that consensus agreement, it's your responsibility and mine to push it. And I just want to conclude with those two statements. One is, it is our responsibility to do the research, to do the analysis, to do the monitoring. I think the Balaton group is very good because we take a long-run view of things, we try to understand how the systems work, we can do research and analysis, and we can put things out of the ground. You people in universities, students, professors, faculty members, do the analysis, research, put it out into the public domain. But the other side of the coin is also that we have to act as citizens. We have to act as citizens to hold our policymakers and the powerful people accountable. We have to stand out there on the street. Imagine a city which is governed, it would not be governed well if nobody is out in the square. You have to be out in the square and you have to protest and say, we will not accept this. That kind of a protest, that kind of a movement is necessary. I personally believe that we now live in a world which is truly global. What the diplomats have enabled us to do is to say, this is what we want. And behind it also, this is what we don't want. But beyond that, it is now for us to come together as citizens to make sure that what we want is what we get. And in part it requires protest, which could be random or chaotic, but in part also it requires more organization. I personally believe that the next step in the process, in our process, has to be a global citizens movement, because that is the only way in which the hard work of the diplomats can then lead to an improvement in the quality of life of people everywhere. And that's really for young people like you.
Many thanks, Tariq. Well, I challenge you in the hope that you will continue to play the role of the skeptic. And while you did that to some extent, you also told us that there is no straightforward answer. Actually, it depends, and it depends to a significant degree on us, how we shape our institutions, how we, how we exercise our rights, and how we bring our values to bear on the political process. So, so it's not automatic that, of course, that.
Unfortunately, we live in the real world. Yes,
we live in
we don't live in the matrix where the computer is going to determine everything.
At least not yet. Yeah. So our actions matter, and I think this leads to a question on what are the conditions for exercising our responsibilities. And now I would like to turn to Bala, because as we mentioned at the beginning, the Balaton group has, or members of the Balaton group, they bring ideas and tools that we think are important in exercising these responsibilities. And some of those insights are not old, others are emerging. And maybe Bala, you can tell us a couple of words about what some of these tools and ideas are that help us in that process.
Yes. How many of you have read Limits to Growth? Wow! Wow! this is a good university.
That takes the wind out of our sails, doesn't it?
So,
it means we can have a real conversation.
In Limits to Growth, the people who did the analysis for the Club of Rome, Donella Meadows and Dennis Meadows, who, by the way, also founded the Balaton group, they are looking with systems analysis. That is, when you look at causes and effects, and you can, change the system and over here, and you don't have your eyes up here, so you don't know there is an effect over here also. So you can draft up all the different complex interactions, and then put that into a systems model where you have mathematical equations to help you, and all of them interact all the time. And this is a very powerful tool to see how systems work. And they were analyzing the interaction between population growth and the use of our natural resources. And they came, did a few scenarios to show what would happen what is, if we don't change anything, we just keep on with the same economic growth as now, the same resource use and population rises, what will happen? And so they had one standard run, and then they had various scenarios where they looked at what if we try to reduce the population growth, what if we use our natural resources more effectively, and so on, where they sort of came to show that you could actually stabilize the system. But if you would continue on business as usual, you would come to some maximum, and then things would start to collapse. Yeah, but it's not a collapse that happens sort of one day, but sort of gradually. And now, as we look back, more than 40 years, we are spot on the standard run. So that means that we don't really understand the system we live in, and we're just going, we're just like sticking a head in the sand or standing by the cliff and not noticing that we are really in a dangerous space in time. And therefore, we really need to put our heads together to find the solutions. As Hunter will tell you more about, the system was actually designed to do this. There were people who actually designed the system to do exactly what it's doing. And we haven't been clever enough to trip them up. So what Balaton members are doing, and like Janos is a Balaton member, he was working right there directly with the United Nations setting these goals. And this is evidence-based policy. That is, first the scientists come in, present all the evidence, and then the diplomats take their conclusions. And you may think that 17 goals is like a shopping list, but underneath that there's a lot of systems thinking. Even though the systems diagrams are not on the paper. But now, what we have to do now is to decide on what are the indicators to show us that we are actually going in the right directions. And that is exactly what Balaton members are very good at, to find leverage points in the systems that will change the direction. And many people, including Janos here, are actually developing these indicators. And other people like Hunter is going to redesign the economy to fit within the planetary limits. Not that small goal, but we're going to give it a go. So, have I answered the question? Pretty much?
That's very good.
So, even though the Balaton group hasn't been very visible, and if you tell people, as you remember the Balaton group, they go, what's that? They may know there's a Lake Balaton in Hungary, but they don't know anything more. Balaton members are very much involved in the development process, and some of them are politicians in developing countries, others are NGOs for example, in Indonesia, sitting there at the back, doing a remarkable transformation of her community. Others run a happiness institute in Japan to help people live more simply and be happier. Others are direct advisors to the United Nations, work within the United Nations, like Tariq has done, and so on. So by coming together every year at Lake Balaton and spending a week contemplating on specific sustainable development issues, we can then all go home and apply what we have learned at the meeting, or put together some projects and try to lead the world in the correct direction.
Thank you, Vala. As you were talking, I think I was thinking that we should say this, that despite the involvement of many members of the Balaton group in the transformation that is happening in the world, in a sense, there is no blueprint for the changes. In fact, there is no secret agenda. There is no secret Balaton group agenda for sure. There is an interest in bringing the tools and the knowledge we have in the interest of the public good, on how environment, development, human well-being is evolving in this very critical moment in time, as you said.
Yeah. So what I can say, having been a member of the Balaton group, and not as long as these guys, is that all of the people in the group share the same values. They do want to care for people, to care for the earth, and share the profits. Those are our values, basically. And very much these people are not only working from the head, even we have a lot of very smart scientists in the group, but also from the heart. And this is something that Donella Meadows brought very much into the group. I unfortunately never met her, but she was a very hardcore, nerdy scientist doing systems analysis until she finally realized that Beyond Limits came out in 1982, or was it 92?
92.
92. That it wasn't enough to just be a nerdy scientist and talk to your fellow scientists. You also needed to tell a story so that other people would buy into it and work with you. And actually, so jobs in the future. Every country in the world will have to report on their sustainable development progress. So every nation will have to have specialists to collect the data that will be required. And this can be done in a very imaginative way. One of the things we were discussing was to engage with citizen movements. And get children out there to measure oxygen in lakes, and then gather together also the data from the satellite systems that go over our heads every day, which could give us data that is otherwise difficult to measure. So we need to integrate all the data that we can get on the ground with the data we can get from our sophisticated systems, and this is not a trivial task, and I guess that most countries will have to set up specific offices to report on the goal, probably within ministries. What do you think, Janus?
Or statistical offices.
Yeah, or statistical offices. So there's a lot of work to be done in the next 15, 16 years.
Thanks, Vala. So, having said all this, obviously an enormous task ahead of us. So there's a question, how do we get there? How do we get there in terms of knowledge, in terms of technology, in terms of investment? And particularly, how do we benefit from the enormous capacity, technological capacity, even capital, human capital, and financial capital that is invested in governments, in companies, at the community level, and that is currently working in a way that is very often against the interests of the public good. In fact, it is very often pushing us in a different direction than where we should be going, than the Sustainable Development Goals. So how do we make use of that enormous and turn around that enormous capacity so that it works, it supports the agenda that is all in these goals at the global level, or the goals that will be developed, as Vala suggested, at the community level, at the national level, at the organizational level. So how do we use that energy? How do we use that capacity, that innovation for the common good? How do we turn that around? And then finally, how do we articulate that as a cohesive, as as a clear agenda that is understood by everyone. So maybe Hunter, I can turn to you with that easy question to give us some answers.
In 5 minutes or less. What other time in history would you rather have lived in? Dr. Sylvia Earle, the great oceanographer, says what humanity does in the next 10 years matters more than what people do for the next 10,000 years. The challenges that we are facing are daunting. We're losing every major ecosystem on Earth. If you look at the planetary boundaries, we're beyond the boundaries. And if you look at the human minimums, what Kate Raworth, who spoke at the Balaton group, called the donut, the safe operating space. So you're below the planetary boundaries and you're above the minimums that people need for well-being and dignity. We're below the minimums all across the planet, and we're above the boundaries. When most of this shit hits the fan, I will be safely dead. You guys will be squarely in the middle of your productive careers. So, sorry, over to you. But what we discussed at Balaton was how can we bring the skills that we've developed. You know, many of us have been at this for a long time. How can we bring these skills in this incredible moment of opportunity that János and Laszlo and some of the people who, and Tarek, some of the people who have been working within the UN system to finally bring humanity to a set of agreed goals. You know, let's pause at that for a moment. This has never happened. And János put it, I mean, I've been safely, well, the goals will go to the General Assembly and they'll take a year, and so I don't really have to worry about whether or not they're going to get approved until next September. And János came into the meeting and said they've been approved. What? The General Assembly, having been part of the Open Working Group, said, we've negotiated these. These are our goals. Let's go. So we should really take a moment and celebrate. And we should celebrate the individuals who made this possible. And János received the award for Balaton Member of the Year for his incredible work in stewarding this forward. And this is something that Central Europe should be very proud of. He is one of you. And it is something the entire world should be celebrating as we take a breath and realize that time is very short. We have a lot of work to do. We cannot do it alone. As the people who have worked within the UN system say, the diplomats have done their bit. Now it's over to us. It's over to citizens, and it is over to the powerful of the world. The business community. I teach business. I'm a professor at an MBA school in New York City. And I work with business. I consult for companies, communities, countries all around the world. I have consulted for some of the biggest companies on earth, companies like Royal Dutch Shell and Walmart. And some of the smallest, companies like Patagonia, that have sustainability baked into their DNA. They are committed to trying to find ways of doing business with the least impact they can have on the planet. And I sit on the advisory board of Unilever, along with Rick Ridgway of Patagonia. And I can tell you from the inside of these companies that the people who run the companies are not the evil, greedy bastards that are out to screw the world. Paul Pullman, who runs Unilever, Tritoff, the CEO of North American Unilever, are wrestling with how can we run a company that reports to shareholders in a way that is truly sustainable. Now, is Unilever sustainable? No, of course not. Are they struggling honestly, deeply to come up with answers? Yeah, they are. And to me, this is the greatest source of hope as I meet CEOs, as I meet people. I work with a man who was 18 years managing director at JP Morgan. Now, they are the evil bastards. And he walked away in 2001. He read Limits to Growth, and it changed his life. And he has now committed his life to transforming finance and an approach called regenerative economics. He points out nature doesn't set out to be sustainable. Nature is sustainable because it is regenerative. What would it be to have an economy based on natural principles, on the principles of complex adaptive systems? And he's trying to put together a set of principles of a regenerative economy. And he and I, Vala, a number of members, Dr. Robert Costanza, a number of members of the Balaton group were asked, about 2 years ago by the King of Bhutan to reinvent the global economy. It's like, me? But we've been working away at it. To me, the hallmark now of good management, and I see this in many of the CEOs with whom I work, they say, right, we're going to become 100% renewably powered. And the next thing they say is, I haven't a clue how to do it. That's good management. Set the goal and then go figure out how to do it. And this is what the UN has just done. It has set goals. Tariq said this in our meeting. You take a look at the Sustainable Development Goals, all 17 of them. You would not disagree with any one of them. You look at the targets. They're good targets. Now the question is how? How do we get this done? Part of the answer is citizens in the streets. And I leave here tomorrow morning at, oh God, dark 30 to fly to New York City to march with Bill McKibben and 350.org at the Great Climate March. And to teach my students, all of whom will be marching with us. We're taking our entire MBA school into the streets because this is where business belongs. And many of my business colleagues will be marching with us. I think it's time to get over the notion that business is the enemy. Do any of you want a job? Hands up those of you who don't ever want a job. Me? Yeah. Then you're going to be in business. If you're working for an NGO, it's still a business, it's a corporation. Government, well, maybe you can argue about that, but now everybody's saying, well, we ought to run our governments like a business. We need to create an economy in service to life, an economy that works, as Buckminster Fuller put it, for 100% of humanity. That's going to take entrepreneuring. It's going to take creating whole new businesses. Why is it now that the spread of solar power around the world, but particularly in Europe and in China and the US, is scaring the hell out of the electric utility industry? Why? Because it is threatening their business model. How did that happen? Solar was never going to be cost effective, yeah? 3 little words by a man named Jigger Shaw. Jigger's the founder of Sun Edison. No money down. You can put solar on your roof, and a company like Solar City will pay to put it on your roof. Now they will own the cells and they will sell the power to the utility, and you will pay your utility bill to them. Whole new business model. But because of that, because people can start putting solar on their roofs right now, solar is soaring to the point that it is now possible. Dr. Mark Jacobson at Stanford, we can run the entire world on renewable energy by 2030. All right, let's do it. And it's starting to happen. And the big incumbent industries are faced with this choice. Are we a part of the future or are we a part of the past? And it's up to all of us to answer this question for them. Do we want them? Do we want them as part of our new economy? If we don't, walk away from them. When institutions lose legitimacy, they die very quickly. Yeah, no place knows that better than here, what used to be behind the Iron Curtain. When the institution lost legitimacy, it went down. So where are we going to put our dollars? Are we going to buy from companies that are doing the right thing, or the old guys? How are we going to live our lives? What jobs are we going to take? Where are we going to put our investments? I'm working with a group of investors creating 100% fossil fuel-free investment portfolios. And just 2 days ago, Bloomberg came out with a report. It said, get out before you're the last one. What that means is divest of ownership in fossil companies. Who started calling for that? Billy McKibben, an Humboldt College professor who about 2 years ago went on a bus tour across the United States, went to colleges and said to the college students, you were the guys who killed apartheid in South Africa through the divestment movement. It's time to do it to fossil. And everybody laughed at him. Billy nearly killed himself. Speech after speech, trying to sleep on a bus. He said, I'm never going to sleep on a bus again. Just going down the road, talking to young people, saying, we can do this. And when I see Billy in New York, we'll shake his hand and tell him he's my hero. Because it was his courage to say, let's do it again, that led to this divestment movement. And now it's happening. You know, when Bloomberg tells you, get out, this is no longer a good investment. Last one out, turn out the lights. It's happening. There is a report from Citigroup called Energy Darwinism that says, they said, you can now get utility scale solar on offer for 4 or 5 cents a kilowatt hour. This is cheaper than the running cost of a gas plant. But they said, we don't count that, that's subsidized. Note to Citi, all energy is subsidized and the fossil is subsidized 12 times what all the renewables are, but fine. What they said that was interesting, 10-year forward price of gas unsubsidized, roughly 11 cents a kilowatt hour. 10-year forward price of solar unsubsidized, roughly 10 cents a kilowatt hour. They said it's over, solar wins. This is now the era of renewables. Notice I have not mentioned a polar bear. This isn't about polar bears. This is about better business. And there are now more than 50 studies showing that the companies that are the leaders in environment, social, and good governance policy have, take your pick. Those wild-eyed environmentalists at Goldman Sachs, say 25% higher stock value. The fastest growing stock value. They're well protected from value erosion, even in a down economy. It's happening. Sustainability is breaking out everywhere around the world. And the same article that quoted Bloomberg on divest said, developing countries are now looking at whether they should leapfrog to renewables because it's a cheaper option for their future than investing in a new coal plant. Now this here wreck ain't over with yet. We have a lot of fighting to do. The incumbent industries will go down very noisily. And they'll try to take a lot of us with them. And business as usual, this is what new study out of Melbourne, Australia, that looked at those old limits to growth collapse charts and said we're spot on track. So business as usual, your future is real ugly. And you have the opportunity, we all have the opportunity to build this world that works for 100% of humanity. You want to do it? Well, let's hear it! Yay!
Thanks, Hunter. Listening to you, I always have this feeling that my next question is, okay, so where's the shovel? Let's
go!
Let's go digging.
Yeah.
Right? So, yet, you know, as we know, well, we can't afford to fail. You know, we have, I'm not saying we have one shot at this.
We kind of have one shot.
We're not far.
That's what this Australia study shows. We've got one shot at it.
You know? that's a decade. That one shot is a decade or something on that.
That's what
in that
Sylvia
range.
says.
That's right. Okay, so we've got one shot.
No vacations, guys. We got work to do.
And we can't afford to fail. But here's a dilemma. We can't afford to fail, but we know that failure is part of the journey. It's part of the journey. You know, it happened in the past. It's gonna happen in the future. So, and of course, the real question is, you know, not simply just, you know, how you avoid it, because some failures are unavoidable. And how do we learn from that?
Fail fast.
And
that's the Silicon Valley maxim. Do your failing early, so you still have time to get it right.
Well, do it early, and how do we recognize it? How do we recognize it? How do we tell the difference between failed early on? How do we recognize it? This is going, guys, you know, turn around, wrong direction, and move somewhere else. What do we need to do differently? So I'm giving Jamila a really, really tough task. Poor Jamila. Because we can talk about these things too, right? And you are coming from a very interesting perspective of resilience. And I know you speak the language of metrics and accountability and all sorts of other things. So, you know, how do you respond to these? Is that fair enough?
Thanks, and thank you also to all the panel members who already, I think, spoke a lot about the future. And I think I wasn't going to start with this reflection, but I feel very much so right now, and so I'm just going to say it. I think, speaking for myself, but also a lot of my PhD cohort and friends, I feel like we've grown up with almost, you know, feeling this this weight on our shoulders that we can't fail. We have a decade maybe to make a difference. So I think a lot of us have grown up with really feeling that it's our responsibility to make a difference, and how can we do that? I think it's also hard. It's also, vacations are sometimes important to not be too hard on ourselves so that we can keep going. So I wanted to just also give a perspective as a Donella Meadows Fellow. So the Balaton group has new members coming in every year, and the reason that I think this perspective is also really important for what we're talking about with SDGs is that, as Val already pointed out, Dana, is what her friends always called her, really spoke science from her heart. And that's very much what I feel from the Balaton group, and it's one of the main things that, one of the reasons why I'm always so excited to come back every year, because even though we're discussing sometimes these doom and gloom scenarios, we're talking about them in a way to actually, in a very human way, and how to make a difference. And so that's one of the really important things for me. And again, just drawing off of one of the insights from Dana that I've drawn off of is a list of leverage points in how to intervene in a system. So Dana and some of the other panelists here and other members of the Balaton group came up with this list, kind of back of the napkin is how it started out, of where to intervene in a system. And number 3 were goals. So if you've come up with a goal, you're doing quite well, and that's a really big step towards actually being able to change the system. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on was that the way that I see these goals is a bit like a sponge. These goals are there. The UN, the world, nations, 193 nations, are ready for ideas to absorb in order to achieve these goals. And I think that's a very inspiring step to the future. So again, when Janusz came in and said, hey, there's all this energy, it's already been approved, even though I'm not working with SDGs, that's something that was very inspiring. So what can we do as people who aren't working specifically on SDGs, who aren't in the UN, who aren't in high-level meetings, but are young career scientists or engaged members of a citizen movement? One of the questions that came up during the meeting for me, and that we were discussing a bit, is this question that Laszlo started with, is, so what? So we have these goals, but that's not number 1 of the leverage points. That's not changing a paradigm. That's not a mind shift. So how do we go from the shopping list to actually making a difference in the next 15, 16 years? And I wanted to just also convey a few of the key, actually concrete points that came out that maybe some of you are already working on, but that we as the members of the Balaton group thought really were important. And one of them is the systems perspective that Vala was touching on, and integration. So to go beyond this laundry list, there's a lot of thinking that needs to take place at a high-level UN setting, but also at a national level and at community levels. And one of the ways that I work on this, for example, in my own PhD, talking about the donut, that Hunter brought up this idea that there are these planetary boundaries, which is something that the institute where I'm working at Stockholm Resilience Center kind of came forth with inspiration from Tariq. and this idea of a social floor. And so one of the things that I think we need a lot of systems thinking to think about, and what I think is going to be one of the most interesting challenges for the SDGs is, as Tariq mentioned with the MDGs, yes, there have been huge successes in overcoming poverty. The MDGs, in many ways, were very successful. But as we overcome a social floor, what happens to that planetary ceiling? And that space in there, there's a lot of questions of governance and distribution that, to be honest, we need a lot more research on. And that was one of the things that other speakers and members pointed out at this meeting, was that even though we have these goals, there's a lot of research that still needs to be done to figure out how we can actually achieve this. So for me personally, that gave me a lot of hope that the research that I'm doing has maybe even, you know, a more receptive audience. By that I don't mean just interested, but actually that it might mean something. And maybe just to close off before I hand it over back to you, Laszlo, I think that the SDGs are also not necessarily, it's not a master plan for what the world is going to look like in 16 years. So although I was also very grateful for this time to say, what have we achieved? This is amazing, and I think it's harder for me to say that as a relatively young person because I haven't been fighting this fight for as long. But it's not there and done, and now we can move on, and that's up to the UN and nation states and top scientists who are able to work. It's an open working group, but I might not be in there, for example.
It's not that open.
It's not that open. Exactly. Yeah, it's not a blueprint for the world, and I think what another big thing that we talked about is, what does this global citizen movement look like, and what is our narrative? And that was one of the other key highlights, is that we need to work really hard on working on communicating our story. I think there's a lot of mostly maybe young career researchers in here, so we need to get better at communicating what we're doing and why, and how that builds into the global narrative that Hunter was already, also talking about. Thank you.
Well done.
Okay, thanks, Jamila. I was looking at the watch, and we've been going for about an hour. Time flies really fast, and I would like to turn now to the audience and see if there are questions.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Tomasz Pająk. I came from Poland. I'm here for the work placement. I came just 2 streets from here, from the Hungarian Ministry of the Agriculture, the Department of the Environment. I'm here for 1 month, the work placement. But in normal, I work for the climate kids from the organization, and I really love your speech. And what I do in my work, I meet a lot of researchers and business ideas focus on innovation and clean tech. But those researchers and the business, they are not prepared to present them as market oriented. And this is the part of my job, to help them to be like business oriented, to be more prepared for the business. And that's why I love your presentation, your speech. Thank you very much. So it was not a really question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mukesh Gupta. I'm from India, and I'm a PhD student in environmental science and policy. I do not know whether Balaton Group was involved in formulation of MDGs, Millennium Development Goal. That was relatively successful. And I know that Balaton Group is involved in SDGs, right? So I can say that SDG would be successful, but the challenges are more complex than MDGs here, because we do not only need development, but development within planetary boundaries, right? So my question is, can you give an example of one of the many indicators of SDGs that reflects systems thinking? Obviously, because our minds are not thinking in linear terms, right? So how systems thinking are embraced in most of the indicators, goals, targets of the SDGs? Just one example. Thank you.
But, I probably won't give you the answer that you're looking for, in part because there are no indicators yet for the SDGs.
There's one year to make them.
Work is happening. It has been happening for some time already, but this is a longer journey. Of course, on the one hand, we have problems with data. We always had, we always will, but we also have, in a sense, there's a jungle of indicators already. I think the real question is to figure out what is really important and what is not so important, and what is so important that we have to put them on the flag, we have to put it on the banner, and when Hunter is marching on Wall Street, those indicators are on the banner, and then we know that those are the things that are really important, and we really have to act on them. I think that's a difficult one. It's to some extent, science can help provide those answers. What are the leverage points? As Jamila referred to it, we need indicators that are really attached to the leverage points in the system, and I think systems thinking and analysis can help with that. By the way, the SDGs were not derived from a systems thinking process, not a formal. Well, you could say to some extent it was, but not formalized. So we don't know how well they probably quite well reflect common concerns, but they were not, in systematic in that sense. But they can probably, used to construct mental or maybe formal models of complex systems around complex problems, and then we can attach indicators to those. So, that's how I think about it, and then I give the floor to Derek.
Well, I'm a bit more optimistic than my friend on the left, although a little bit less optimistic than my friend on the right. But let me give you one example with which I was personally associated, so I do know. One of the goals is sustainable energy for all. Now, think about it, that the goal is not energy. The goal is not only renewable energy or energy efficiency. It's a composite goal. It recognizes the fact that 80% of the world does not have enough energy, and that no matter which way you look at it, their access to energy will have to be multiplied by a factor of anywhere between 5 or 10 or something. People need more energy. Number two, the form of energy that they have is very inadequate and inefficient, and they need better forms of energy, modern forms of energy. We also recognize that the current form of energy that we use is going to kill us. And so we need a shift to a different system of energy. We also recognize that we are using energy enormously inefficient. This example is kind of not relevant for the next 100 years, but it was relevant for the past 100 years. That when we first started producing electricity, the Thomas Alva Edison in 1881, and all the way up to the early parts of the 20th century, to produce 1 kilowatt hour, we were using 100,000 BTUs of thermal energy. Now the technical number is 3,411. So in that conversion, we were using 100,000 to produce 3,000. Today it's come down to under 10,000, you know. And in some sense, you know, we feel that that efficiency has improved and that has improved our capacity of using this thing. But the potential for efficiency is also much large. So instead of actually coming up with a linear goal, here is a goal which tries to say, you try to bring these things together. And when you look at the goals, the sustainable development goals, you'll find that this kind of a thinking is everywhere. You know, when you think of the food security goal, it's food security, it's agriculture, it's small farmers, it's an integrated systems kind of a framework for doing this. So, you know, we don't sort of have, we are not at the point where we kind of say we've just put everything into stone, but what I want to say is that some of that thinking is already in that pipeline, you know, and in that sense, I'm, as I said, a little bit more positive about this. I have a lot of criticism, as everybody does, but I also, you know, the criticism has to come in by actually appreciating what an enormously difficult task this was, you know. So one has to sort of look at it in both of those directions.
Just quickly, let me give you an answer. Let me give you one answer, okay, but also a challenge to all of you. It's easy to find the goals. You Google UNOWG, okay, and it'll come up, the homepage, and then you find the outcome documents. So go to the targets, spend half an hour on it. Go to the goals and targets, and try to fish out targets which are suspicious to you that if this would be done, then actually this would be very interesting. Now what is interesting? From a systems point of view, important targets are, I would say, threefold. One is that if a target is needed to be achieved because it's blocking something, unless you achieve this, you cannot go further with your progress, okay? So it's a sine qua non. Primary education, okay? Not everybody would go to university, but unless there is primary, it's blocking the way. Second type of target which is important. What is an avalanche? An avalanche is zillions of domino effects, right? You know all what is the domino effect? The cause consequence, I tip the first, it goes all the way. Now an avalanche is several domino effects together, just triggered by one thing. Here I give you the indicator. One of my favorite indicators would be the percentage of any country, in any country, of the girls completing secondary education. Percentage of girls completing 18 years, completing some sort, can be vocational, can be whatever. Okay, and you can imagine what several effects this will have in child marriage, in and so on and so forth. I mean, okay, population, economic empowerment, political empowerment, and so on and so forth. And the third type of target you have to look for is that if I do this, I basically set an engine in motion. It will be a virtuous cycle starting, a sort of a self-reinforcing loop which I can leave alone and it will work for me. There are targets like that. Now, we should find indicators, good indicators, for those targets in the first place, whether those targets are being achieved, because these are the most important ones in the system. Okay, that would be my answer.
Okay. Thank you. So,
Questions?
yeah, further questions?
Thanks a lot. So, Vincent Liéger from France. I am co-writer of a book called The Growth Project, how to implement democratic transition to new models of society, which will be based on sustainability and desirability. And I started to deal with degrowth 10 years ago. I am an engineer, mostly with a very rational approach. The physical limits to growth, and I realized that it's really not enough to change the world, because human beings are rational, but they are not only rational, and that's why I think it's something which we really do inside the degrowth movement. It's very important to also speak about the desirability of implementing new models of society, and to think in a complex way, as you mentioned several times, and to think about how to reappropriate the meaning of life, how to reappropriate autonomy, how to reappropriate conviviality, how to reappropriate the tools, local economic system, more fair local system and so on. And I just would like to share what I've just experienced. I'm back from Leipzig, and there was the 4th International Digos Conference, and there were 3,200 people, mostly young people, with a lot of very interesting discussion, and a lot of people also involved in grassroots movements, in local alternatives. So I would like to say that I think the transition is already underway. There is a silent transformation of society which is going on. You can see that everywhere in the world, in the north, in the south, in the east, and so on, there are people who locally start to experiment what could be tomorrow new models of society based on what I call degrowth, so implementing this transition. And I would like to add that I think it's that's one of the critics I could make to the presentation you made. I think you cannot solve a problem in using the same principles of processes which implemented the problem. So I am a bit shocked when I hear this word like development or what you said about economics, because I think one of the main problems is this paradigm. This paradigm when we speak about development, there is a Western imperialistic background of development. There is also a view of the world which let us believe in this illusion that always more is enough to make sense, always more is enough to make well-being and everything. So I would suggest that we should take a distance with this type of word and to speak more open, more debate about other words like autonomy, like conviviality, for example. Thank you very much.
First of all, here is my card. I want to be in touch with you. Secondly, agree. We need a whole new mental model. The mental model that the world works on today, and that I would submit is in every one of our heads, was very intentionally created. In 1947, 39 men got together at a place called Montpellier outside Montreux, Switzerland, and they built the intellectual architecture of neoliberalism. The concept had been around for a while, but they really put a coherent intellectual architecture and a bit of a strategy. Now, it took them 40 years to fool around and really find their strategy. But they built the Chicago School of Economics. They got 3 of their members as heads of state. They got their members as advisors to every head of state on the planet, 8 Nobel laureates. And with the rise in my country of Ronald Reagan and in the UK of Margaret Thatcher, they won. It became the dominant economic mental model, paradigm. To the point that my president, who is now said to be the most liberal president ever, is economically to the right of Ronald Reagan. Austerity, this crime that is sweeping the planet. This notion that individuals are paramount, the rugged individualist, the man on the white horse, that security comes from armies, and that prosperity is more. This was all very deliberately built. So what we're setting out to do with a team of about 50 and growing is to build the new intellectual architecture. What is it? We don't entirely know yet, but it's not the old one. Degrowth is clearly a huge part of it. I was just meeting with the founder of Airbnb. This notion that you can rent a stranger's house room anywhere in the world. What he finds most appealing about that is that his hosts are now making a little bit of money that frees them from the job they used to be doing that they hated. They can now they can entrepreneur their dreams. It's creating a whole new economy of sharing and of trust and of people who are total strangers getting to know each other all around the world. And this is happening, whether it be Uber or Lyft in transportation, or all of the forms of the sharing economy, or of transition towns, or all of the forms of relocalization, of local living economies, of individuals coming together and asking, what is it to have an economy? We all need some stuff, probably a hell of a lot less than we actually have. But we measure success by the stuff that we have. Dana said, we are trying to meet non-material needs with things. And so we have shopping therapy. And after 9/11, my president said, go shopping. Because he knew, and he was right. He knew that if you behave as if the economy that exists is just fine, it will be just fine until it collapses. So yes, we need to wholly rethink all of our assumptions. And we need the fiercest criticism of whenever we begin to act out of this old way. So please, I would love your help.
Although we didn't discuss it very much at the Balaton meeting now, there are grassroots groups all over the world seeking to find a different way. And the transition movement that started in 2005 in Britain has now 2,000 initiatives all over the world. And they also have a new initiative called the Reconomy. That is, they are building, they're experimenting with how they can build a local sustainable economy, keeping the money circulating within the local area. And then there are eco-villages, and there's permaculture, and there are so many different initiatives, and I think it's all going to rise and hopefully fast enough before we have the first big shock.
I just wanted to share a metaphor that Hunter actually brought up at the meeting, and I think it's very helpful in how to think about SDGs, is that if we look at this economy that Hunter just explained from 1947, this architect Titanic of an economy, we're basically, what we want to do is come alongside in a party boat, rather than just be like, na 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 na, you're sinking, be like, we have a party boat, and you should join our party boat because it's a lot better and you're going to get a lot more out of it. And maybe the SDGs are a carpet to that better boat that we're still actually building.
Can I actually say something? First of all, I have to say that it's very refreshing to hear from you. I'm very happy that you made that comment. But I also want to add one other thing. Perhaps I'm getting too old, and I realize that I'm living in a profane world. I live in a profane world. I don't live in a pure world. And while it gives me a lot of aesthetic satisfaction when I hear some voice of purity, I also believe that the voices of purity have been some of the most violent voices in our history. And so my suggestion to you, and again, having trodden the same path, it's coming out of a position of sympathy rather than a position of opposition, is to open this question a little bit further. I know that the degrowth movement is one of the powerful movements in our midst, and I hope that it becomes stronger and stronger. But I also hope that it becomes a little bit more sensitive to the profanity of this world. And I mean three things in particular. One is that we live in an enormously unequal world. And this enormously unequal world, we need to find a way in which we do not freeze people into a permanent level of slavery. And not only for aesthetic or for moral reasons, but for very simple political reasons. You freeze them, they pick up the gun. And they are not potatoes in a sack. They will respond. The second concern that I have also by recognizing this profanity, as I call it, is that this the word growth actually hides both the good and the bad. We do want us to have better health, better life, to have a life of dignity, to have the basic things not taken away from us so that we don't really have the kind of indignity suffered to which we are exposed. On the other hand, we also want a life in which we do not have the pollution, we don't have the violence, the destruction, the enormous damage that is being caused. And both of these are growth. That there's growth in a term that we use in a positive sense and a term that we use in a negative sense. And recognizing the two opposition sides, I think, is the recognition of the profanity of the word. And the third point I also want to make is that, unfortunately, we also live in a world that is profane in not only in terms of economics or in terms of the nature of growth, but also in terms of the relationship of power. That means, in order for me to voluntarily renounce, I have to have a sense that I will still be safe. The Amish in the United States can renounce technology because they still have some confidence that the legal, juridical, political systems will protect them. The world, as we know, outside of national boundaries, is a very cutthroat world. And we need to create a system of governance, of trust, of solidarity that gives people the security that you can live simply and not be at the mercy of cutthroat forces around the world. So in some sense, what I'm saying is that while greatly sympathizing with the point that you have made, I would urge you to open it up a little bit, especially to the profanity of the world in which we still live.
Okay. Thank you, Tariq, and thank you for all the contributions to this question. I myself would like to add two metaphors in response to your question. In the first metaphor is the naked king, because I think, as Hunter already alluded to in very clear terms, in a sense, the old world, the world we knew, the world we pretty much grew up in, and the world that was constructed for us in that post-war period, those ideas have been exposed, I would say. 30 years ago, it was sacrilegious, basically, to question those things that we question today, whether it's the GDP. Just in November, there will be yet another meeting at the European Commission on beyond GDP. This is not the first. So you can. There are alternatives to economics, and now we question the basics, some of the basic principles, economic efficiency. Does it really mean what we were taught that it really means? So that's on the one hand. So the king is naked in that sense. Yet there is so much enormous inertia in our existing system, in the education system, in the policy regimes and so on, that still carries on. So that leads me, and yes, that those inertias, on the one hand, they help and maintain the sort of inequalities that Tariq is talking about, but on the other hand, they are also, in a sense, supplying some of the goods that we also rely on. So for those who have it. So there is the enormous challenge, and that's my second metaphor, is the air, and that we used in the Balaton group meeting, is the reconstruction of an airplane in flight, because that's what is needed. We are all sitting, if it's not the Titanic, it's the airplane that is going faster and faster, and we all depend on it. And even though we have alternatives, we know the old engine is failing. We have some ideas about the new engine, and we have to replace and change the new engine in flight. So that is what's happening, because if we don't engineer that well, then that can result in enormous damage, possibly to all of us. And we also see the sign of that. You look in some regions of the world, these processes are happening.
We need Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
Harrison Ford, where is he? Okay, other questions, please.
Actually,
Yeah.
Harrison Ford is working with E.O. Wilson on biodiversity, so we have Harrison.
All right, other questions, please. Or comments from the panel?
Can I add something to this development question? I would encourage you not to give up very important things simply because they are abused. I would think, looking down on the audience or around the audience, that neither of you would give up love in your lives simply because love, the notion of love, has been abused and misused and so on. I mean, development is something essential. I mean, it's something essential. It's the change for the better. It's the quality. It's the change in quality. It's the change for the more adequate. For the you know what I mean. I mean that's development. If your circumstances are changing, then development is to adapt, to learn, to become more and more adequate, more and more fitting, more and more smoothly working, and more beautiful. Whatever, it's a quality thing. It's better quality. So okay, of course, all the financial world and media around us are intermingling and using development for growth and growth for development. I mean, don't care about it. It's development in its original sense is tremendously important. I would even argue that true development is sustainable. If it's not sustainable, it's not development. Because it's not adequate. Okay, so this is just a word of warning. I think that's really important. And while I'm at it, you know, it's may I just underline what has been said in the panel, that we are in Central and Eastern Europe. This region has experienced something fantastic in the past 25 years. I mean, we know that you can change preciously everything in society peacefully if you stick to a few guardrails and stepping stones. I mean, this is enormous. I mean, it has never happened on this globe that in 25 years you change goals of a society, you change the ideology, the values, you change the ownership structures, you change all the laws, you change all the institutions, and people are not massacring each other on the street. I mean, okay, in some countries there was war, but you probably know well the history of that. Over and above, if you look at this whole region and the past 25 years, it's the most remarkable peaceful transition ever, I would venture to say. You challenge me on that in human history. And there are lessons, imminent lessons from that. What are the guardrails? I mean, what are the things which can be left loose on a road like that? We'll find it out while we're going. What are the things we must stick to? I would venture to say human rights, for instance. Certain institutions giving you guarantees for the upholding of that, and so on. It's very valuable lessons for the whole world that peaceful transition for the better is possible. Okay? And we are at the threshold of the other absolutely thorough transition, and either we do it, it's like birth, you know, it's like a delayed birth. But the doctor is sort of sitting on the fence saying that I'll have to induce this birth. I have to, because it's better if I run it than if something happens to the patient. So we are at the point where this birth will have to be induced, but then we better know what we are doing while it's, because once we trigger it, it will go. Then it will go. And that's, I really tell you, that's why some of the enlightened politicians are actually, they know damn well that they should have triggered it 10 years ago, but they still don't dare it because they don't quite feel that they can manage it through. But let's help them. It's a very, very beautiful task.
I think that's a very good note.
Just taking up on what Janos was saying is that people have power. And we choose our politicians. So we can vote with our feet and say, we're not going to vote for you because you're not going to be on our development agenda. You don't care about the planet and the people. You are only serving your own self-interest. We don't want you. We also need well-informed, well-educated politicians. So you guys should also think about going into politics. And then you can help lead your nations. I think it's very important to take part, be an active citizen. You know, don't only go into the street protesting, you know. Come, you know, sit down and come up with the solutions. Build the resilience around you. Build your own community. That's what you can all be involved with.
And be a global citizen.
Yes.
The global citizen. Are there other questions?
My name is Valeria Lukene. I'm from the Young Leaders of Knowledge Center.
Right.
And we we are working on establishing a conference this year about sustainability, as well as raising awareness about sustainable development among young people, because we face in Hungary that people draw parallels between Greenpeace and sustainable development, and they think, well, most of people think this sustainable development sticks only to that part. Though we know that there are 3 circles. And about the Sustainable Development Goals, we are really glad that they have been developed and approved, but as for the implementation, it's really interesting how would be they implemented. Once we have developed the indices, yes, it takes time, then we have to develop these models, but then how would you force the government or the countries to implement this, and then how would you make them accountable? So that would be my question. Maybe it takes a longer time to discuss it, but I'm really interested about it. Thank you.
We are having a municipal election in this country in a couple of weeks. I mean, you go up to those meetings of the candidates, when they are going out to the hearings, and you put these questions to them. First, are you aware that the UN has passed on September 10th a set of sustainable development goals and targets which are globally applicable? Do you know them at all? No, you don't. Okay. Are you willing to read them? What do you know about sustainability? I mean, you don't need to be nasty, but I mean, I'm being quick here, but of course you can be polite. That's not what I'm advocating, is not rudeness. But what I'm trying to say is that this is the point where most of us, my generation, your generation, stops and fails. Because it's awkward. You go there, you stand up, you start becoming whatever, everybody looks at you, you put a question nobody else did, because others were asking about, I don't know, local taxes and why those taxes are getting high, or do you give me guarantees that the local taxes will not get high? You're coming with ideas like parks or whatever. So what I'm trying to say is that really, these are the par excellence moments, because what happens then? The guy who was questioned there and is trying to give you some answer, picks up the phone on his way out and says to his headquarters, Jesus Christ, I'm getting these questions, what is our position on that? I will give you something because I have the next meeting tomorrow. And you ask that from the left and from the right and from the center and from the Greens, and all 4 will be phoning back busily to their headquarters. What the hell are we doing with that? Because I'm being asked about that. And that's a very simple and non-painful way which can be done here in Hungary, all over the country, over the next month.
I think this is a very good question. We do have a lot of, how shall we say, ideas of how things have been done. One cannot say that we've done them so that we've nailed everything down, but we have some ideas. And let me just mention a few of them. Now, the thing to remember, of course, is that we live in a global world, but not in a global government. The United Nations is not a government. It is actually, I personally look at it as a vehicle of the citizens of the world to stand up to the powers and to articulate the kind of things that are needed from the governments, which still happen to be national governments. And in order to do that, we have a number of instruments that we use after the agreement. One is, and this, by the way, goes back all the way to ILO 1919, when it was first set up and set up the goals about, hours of working and labor rights, occupational health standards, etc., etc. One is that they create what is called a mechanism for governments to actually report on performance. And those mechanisms, which were initially just intergovernmental mechanisms, have become much more open mechanisms. And that's partly just naming and shaming, but partly also an opportunity for other civil society groups to engage. So that is obviously one mechanism. The second mechanism is that oftentimes they create rights in the hands of people, institutions, organizations, individuals, and using those rights in legal terms. Like, for instance, if I give the example of the labor unions, it is a right in the hands of the labor unions, who can then sue their governments or sue their employers if they violate certain kind of. So there's a legal process which we've created, and a number of the goals actually do have those legal systems in there. Number 3, there is the rights. The goals create an opportunity for us to be able to educate people on how they can be achieved, because it is not always possible. I mean, not always obvious. One has to still keep on working at it. So one way of enhancing effectiveness is to provide mechanisms of how it can be done. But at the end of the day, it is what Janusz and everybody has been saying. It's really the rights of the citizen. It's the citizen who places the obligation, the challenge to the politically powerful people. I remember I come originally from Pakistan. I was a member of the Environmental Protection Council in my country. And the chairperson of that council was a politician who was not very well regarded for honesty or so forth. And so when he was appointed, we had a lot of concerns. And I went and met with him. I mean, he invited us to come and meet with him. And, you know, people were sort of expressing mostly congratulations, and you know, I being a rebel, I said to him, I said, look, I don't know why you want this job, because implying that, you know, maybe you want to make money from it. What do you want? Why do you want this? And his answer to me, I mean, I cannot say that I'm a fan of his, but his answer to me was actually a very good one. He said, look, Tariq, forget about all of these things that people are saying about it. I want to say to you one thing. He said to me, pointing at it, he said, I'm a powerful man, and I'm placing myself at your service. If you want to use me, welcome. If you don't want to use me, it's your problem. Now, in some sense, what I'm saying is that the UN system has done more or less what he said. It's created something to place this power at your service. And I think our request is, please use it. Use this power. Thank you.
My name is Brendan. I'm a PhD student at CU. Also, I work at the REC with Janos. So that's who I am, but now a relatively negative question. I see some irony in the Sustainable Development Goals. And as all of you had said, that we're on a very dangerous trajectory that needs to be changed in this generation. And I think that that's probably true, and that if we don't make some important changes now, that we're going to be in for a big catastrophe in the next couple generations. At the same time, we have the new Sustainable Development Goals, which have several different goals within them, 17 of them. One of them is to lift the world out of poverty and to end and eradicate poverty, which is a very important goal, and I think that that's something that should be addressed. But at the same time, when you think about it, there's probably 80% of the world's population that lives on about $10 a day. And lifting these people up out of poverty and ending it will create some major implications on other goals that we're seeking to achieve. Also, when you eliminate energy poverty and give access to electricity to people who are now, for instance, using wood to fuel their energy needs, or maybe just living without electricity, this is also going to create major problems. And so we have 15 years where we'll be seeking to achieve these goals. As we know, and as has been mentioned, that in Western mature economies, that we have been just started to think about sustainability and just starting to make adaptive measures to try to live in a more sustainable planet. So when we're trying to resolve issues such as poverty in terms of energy and financial poverty of people around the world, then clearly this is something that's going to be addressed in the next 15 years. You have mature Western economies that are just starting to think about how to integrate this into the current economic system. And so obviously this will be done in a way that is going to be as the current status quo is, because we're going to be reacting in the next 15 years to have this development in these countries. And so my concern is that when you're trying to achieve one thing, that it's going to have an impact on many other issues that we may also be seeking to make an impact on. And so my question to you would be, how can you reconcile these contrasts, and especially when it needs to be done now, and development will happen now in these countries, but we don't really have an answer now. And
we do it.
So that's
Well,
question.
we got the answer.
Okay, so let's disagree with Brandon. Who wants to disagree first?
Tarek, you want to go, then I'll go? Other way around, all right.
Uncle always first.
We have every technology we need to solve every problem facing humanity. We're not deploying it. So it really is a question of deployment and economics. And the economics are starting to work in our favor. Swanson's law. Price of photovoltaics falls 20% for every doubling. And it has been doubling every couple of years. Now, exponential growth is a bad thing when we're talking about total resource use. It can work in our favor with some of these incoming technologies. 8 more doublings and we power the world entirely with photovoltaics. Now, that's a bad idea for a whole lot of reasons, but it gives you a sense of some of the speed at which this stuff can happen. We're now building multi-gigawatt photovoltaic stations in a year or two. And it doesn't take very many of those in some of the poorest places to lift people significantly out of the grinding poverty they're in right now. So it really is a question of how do we deploy our financial resources, and that to some extent is, again, up to you guys. What's your money doing right now? Do you know? If it's in most of the major banks, you haven't a clue. It's probably not up to any good. But there are now starting to be financial institutions that are turning money into the real economy, into local communities, into genuine development. We need to do a lot more of that. As these economics shift, that becomes a lot easier to do. And as these ecospasms come at us, and they're coming ever faster, consciousness about, shit, we have to act, goes way up. So I think our real challenge is to be ready with science-based answers, with the technologies that are commercialized already, ready to go to market, shovel-ready projects to start rolling out as people in developing countries say, we can't burn any more carbon. What are we going to do? Okay, here's what you're going to do. Here's how you solve energy poverty. It's not coal, it's renewables. It's the best technologies in sustainable ways to deliver energy, water, food, housing, healthcare, sanitation, transportation. And there are people around the world who know how to do this sustainably. We can do it. Question is, will we?
Well,
you were talking about what if we try to achieve one goal and it will then have a bad effect somewhere else. Well, we don't talk about in these goals that we want to reduce population. That's the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. But what is one of the goals is to educate all girls. And once you educate girls, they have fewer children. So that will help the population to stabilize. I'm not as optimistic as Hunter is about that we can make all this renewable technology because we are material constrained. We are hitting the time of peak everything. So how we use our materials, we have to do it very carefully, and we have to recycle everything at the end of its lifespan. So there's a lot of innovation which is needed.
Tarek, did you want to chip in? You know, Jamila.
I was just going to maybe agree a bit more that I don't think we do know what the answers are, and part of the job is, or not the job, but the answers are yet to be discovered that we can't even imagine. So it's about creating space for those answers and that pluralism and that diversity in the process. So that's what I'm really interested in, is how do we create the process for that innovation, for those solutions, for those poverty alleviation measures to take place where they matter, because I can't imagine what they are.
Read my papers.
Read my damn book.
Okay, so the answers are apparently there. You know, I think you just gave us good reasons to come back. One of the points that we've made in general sense, that it's not enough to look at problems in their isolation. We need the systems perspective, and that's kind of an overemphasized point now, but it's something that is really still not internalized in many of the sectors related to the thing and related to the thinking of many of the problems. Just last week I was in the capital of a very large country discussing green economy transition issues with very influential people reporting directly to the cabinet. And the instruments that these very influential people were using related to the energy transition were used to create transition scenarios, and they were projecting that in this case the emissions from this country will be, I mean, they've been going up, of course, and they will plateau around 2040 at roughly 3 times the level of the present. And we were just looking at, and that was the optimistic projection. So we were just looking at these people. Are you guys serious? And they said, well, no, we have to be realistic. And here is our model, and this is what we are getting out of our model. So, and then we said, okay, so where is in your model a representation of the capacity of the atmosphere to absorb all that, whether at the climate level or whether at the level of your cities, where people are already choking because of the air pollution, which would inevitably follow if you triple your emissions. Almost no matter how efficient you will be technically. I mean, it's gonna, at that scale, it's gonna happen. And then, the answer was, well, that's not really there.
Not in the model.
So it's not in the model. The systems perspective is missing from, most of the tools and the analytics that are being used in those centers of advice and research and close to the governments. I mean, and not just governments. So, and that of course goes back to the education institutions, because all the guys who build those models, who run them, who use them, they all got educated to do exactly that. And we couldn't really tell that okay, can you add something else to your model, like that sink function from the atmosphere? So maybe you might realize that the consequences of that policy action, and then you wouldn't tell me that we have to be realistic, because that's part of your reality. You're not realizing it because your tool is broken and your theory is broken. Okay, we've been going for an hour and 50 minutes, and we truly appreciate your patience and interest. But we said we'd go up to 2 hours, so if there is one more question, I would be happy. There is indeed a last question.
Thank you so much for... I'm sorry, I'm a CU graduate and I'm currently based with a startup here, where we're trying to develop solutions for urban slums to be able to have access to sanitation, water and energy resources alongside food production. Yeah, it sounds utopia, but we're trying to do it. And my question is a bit different. I have some experience of working on early stage venture capital also in clean tech. And as ma'am, you were saying a couple of times, how do you think that SDGs would encourage institutional capital to flow in businesses of such sorts which can solve the problems which we are talking about? That's it.
First of all, I'm not a ma'am, I'm Hunter. Second of all, that is yet to be answered, but it is going to be one of the key questions. We have to transform the flows of capital out of the speculative economy and into the real economy. So as we build out the targets, finalize them, and build out the indicators, building the funding mechanisms, and ensuring that sufficient money is going to these good entrepreneurial ventures, I think the slums are going to be the center of innovation for the future. And organizations like Slum Dwellers International that are linking slums around the world and bringing capacity into the slums are going to be the sort of place that bright companies go because they want access to these bright ideas that are emerging from the slums. And I'm working with several very large companies on this notion of you ought to be doing your R&D in slums. If you want to know what technologies are going to be the technologies to meet the needs of billions of people, go and talk to the people who are doing this work in the slums and start investing in them. So this is a process that's underway, and it needs a lot more effort.
What kind of companies are these?
I can't tell you that right yet, but let's you and me talk.
Okay, anyone else from the panel?
Maybe just a brief comment. This is that it was an interesting demand during, there were many discussions in New York in the past 7 months on the fringes of this process and in the process. And one demand was actually coming mainly from the southern countries, so to speak, is that governments should brace up themselves and take up the responsibility to govern, actually. It's not the economy or economists or businesses who should govern in a political sense, but it's the government, for God's sake. Now, the governments can use seed money to trigger investment. They can use regulations. I mean, one of the big mistakes, I mean, I sort of drew a shining picture of the CE transition in the past 25 years. One big mistake we did, we allowed greenfield investments before all our brownfields were cleaned and you know, regenerated. If we wouldn't have allowed it, we would have said to the incoming capital, there's lovely brownfields, there you go and do it. They would have done it, grumpily, but they would have done it because of the competition. Okay? So the combination of this, that can sort of steal money, even if the money is not mine, that I'm regulating, I'm holding back the money from certain things, and I'm in a way promoting with my own smaller money the inflow of the bigger one. This has happened, by the way, during the regeneration, the rebuilding of the Balkans after the war, with this little seed money and a lot of influx of private money. There are interesting programs and experiences about that.
Okay, Janos, thank you very much for everyone. So I would like to acknowledge members of the panel for your comments and insights. And we didn't just straight report out the results of the meeting of the group. I think there was a lot more said from our individual perspectives, but that's how these Balaton group meetings are. We do put our heart and mind into the discussion. And so I also want to acknowledge those members of the group who were here last week and whose thoughts and ideas and dreams influenced our thinking. Some of what we tried to relay. I also want to acknowledge the other members of the group who are not here, who were not here at the meeting. Some are actually hitting who were in the group. They should probably just stand up and wave their hands. Okay. So and thanks for those members online who will be watching this, and others who are not members but sympathize with us. And finally, I really want to thank our audience that stuck with us and that asked good questions. You know, I think it's clear that we are on a perilous journey. There is time is tight. We have to pedal hard, but we are sitting on a bicycle that has many pedals. So if we all push together, it's going to go faster. It's going to go in the right direction. So we are on a journey together, and I would like to close the meeting with a great thanks and please a great applause for others on the panel, for those who helped us get here, and for those who came to the meeting and who will be with us on this journey. Thank you very much.